all. This is Dr. Mubin Sayed from drbeen.com. Welcome to one more show. So today we have with us our own Paul Bork, and we're going to talk about latest COVID situation. So Paul, please take it away.
Oh, thank you, Moby. Let me turn the little marker on. There we go. Okay, so it was about a month ago, and we're just review the COVID stats, and I've got a little extra that we'll get to in just a minute as we go forward. So this should be fairly quick and follow the formatting that we have done before. Here's a summary slide, which actually is a duplicate. And so we start off with using titles from things. All quiet on the COVID front. COVID pandemic is not over. And we're past the beginning of the end. We're not yet at the end of the end. To borrow from Winston Churchill about the World War II. Take a look again to see how good the predictions that we had are and how they look now. And then we have something completely different than COVID, sort of a flavoring, not the main dish. And that is from a 1971 British sketch comedy from Monty Python's Flying Circus, which I watched a great deal when I was younger. Okay, overall, this I think I talked about last time. As of April 13th, the worldometer is no longer being updated. The world is walking away. Most of the world tracking systems open to the public have been closed. Perhaps the governments are trying to show that they have managed this, but they still want people to take vaccinations, as we'll talk about. But first, let's take a look at where we are. We're having, I'm going to change the order back the way I had it before. Okay, after a month's delay, the US CDC has decided what the COVID vaccine vector is. They've selected one, and this is taken from their article and the fourth and fifth paragraphs in their entirety. And there is the web page that I got it from. And so they're saying, based on the totality of the evidence, on June 6th, the FDA initially advised manufacturers licensed and authorized to use COVID-19 vaccines in 2024 and 25 formula in the U.S. beginning in the fall of 24 should have monovalent. Before, remember, they had the original plus, and they're using JN1 is the variant cluster around JN1 that they're using. So they'll probably use the JN1 specific variant itself, the one that is described, but there's a whole bunch of them that are still called that. And if one of the things that they're doing is this is the same, I believe, as the flu vaccine, where they're not doing any testing to see if there's harm or anything in each of the new vaccines. They're just changing the formula. The flu vaccine is done the same way. And I think originally after they got the first one in, that was the reason they left the original variant in. They were trying, the manufacturers are trying to make the argument, and perhaps the government too, that it's just a modification of the prior one and we don't have to look at safety anymore. And so my understanding is that they will not be looking at safety. It'll be the same as any number of other vaccines, in particular the flu vaccine, that they change the genetics of it each time and they don't do any safety reviews. The next paragraph, so this is the JN1. Then the next one said, go through, they're continuing to monitoring the changes based on the most current available data, along with the recent rise in cases. They prefer that the JN1 lineage, that they take the KP2 strain if feasible. I don't know how this instruction, the vaccine makers will decide if it's feasible or not. Feasibility usually has some component of money involved with it. But anyway, I didn't spend the time to figure out exactly what they were saying, but they're authorizing the JN1. It has to be the KP2 unless the manufacturers find it's infeasible, and then they can do the JN1, which is the parent of the KP2. And I'll show you that in just a minute. And so then I go through talking, and then here is an interesting last sentence in the fifth paragraph. The agency does not anticipate that a change to the KP2 will delay the availability of vaccines for the United States. So feasibility clearly doesn't mean delay, because if there was a delay, then this last sentence wouldn't be here. So feasibility must, I don't know what it is, because they're not testing it. So anyway, we're either going to get the JN1 or the KP2. So any questions about that?
No, it is interesting that you also honed in on the word feasibility. I want to quickly show, if you don't mind, I'm going to very quickly show the same screen. And if you see here, this is the FDA approves authorized updated mRNA COVID vaccine to better protect against currently circulating variant, August 22. And I had also highlighted feasible to say, what kind of an instruction is that? So interesting that you reached the same point. Back to
And
you.
there may be a very, very good answer, but I just don't know what it is. And clearly, it's not something that leapt out of for you as well. So anyway, so now to this one. See, I've circled here. This is the JN1, the one that is almost completely gone now. And this right here is the KP1, the one that is decreasing right now, but is still 10% of the new cases. So this is what we're getting the vaccine for. And here they are up here. And I guess I was wrong. It's it's 10%. And here the JN1 now is, it looks like they think it's 0.2%. And this is what they're directing at. We're talking about what they're doing. I'm not saying I have a better method of coming up with a vaccine or a better way of predicting what it's going to be. I'm just want people to know what it is that the government is doing and what they've said. And all this is straight from the CDC so far. Every page is from theirs, and this is the variant they picked, and these are the numbers that they're reporting for the variants they picked. And if we go down to the last time I presented, which was in June, you see we had the KP2 was coming up, and the KP3 and whatever, and they weren't clear which ones, and now the ones that they thought were going to be big, you can see how well they did in predicting it, and they've never done well in predicting, I don't believe, and I think it may be very, very difficult to do it, or they're, whatever factors are relevant, they're not looking at them or can't find them or don't know them, and it seems like you sort of sit back and like the old weatherman used to be able to tell you in great detail what happened last week, but talking about tomorrow or next week was a little more difficult. So we have the same thing here. Okay.
Understood. Thank you.
Here is the next strain, and this is the origin, which again, let's be clear, this is not where it started mutating. It had been mutating going back a long way. This just happened to be the one that they first sequenced coming out of Wuhan, and there may have been all kinds of other infections and going on, and some of these things that we say, oh, the XBB came from here, it might have been coming from something before and came along. They're just putting these together to try to show what they believe occurred. And here we are. This is the BN1 that they're talking about. And you can see the distance that it took to get to BN1 that's going to be the vaccine. And you can see the distance that we have already covered moving forward. And here's an old slide. And again, we talked about that. We already talked about this one. Now, looking at the CDC, we now, and this is a little difficult to read, and I apologize for that, but they've taken the numbers off the direction of change. The positivity, you can see the chart coming up. The little green ovals are mine. Okay, so you can see the positivity looks like it's coming up. The trend in hospitalization is coming up, but they won't tell you how much. So this is the emergency room visits. This is a hospitalization, even less. So we have higher increase in positivity, a little less for hospitalization or for emergency rooms, a little less for hospitalization, and a little less for deaths, which is just the way you would think it would occur if we're getting another wave. Now, unfortunately for the CDC not wanting numbers, in my previous one, I had a little curve they had, and they had numbers. So I drew a little oval that fit in and made this one the same size as the other ones. And so maybe the vertical change is the same. And I just stacked up how many of these we had from before. And before they said it was 16.2. Here, I think there's definitely two, more than 2.5, maybe 2.7. And if it's 16% each time from before, that means there's a 42% increase in the positivity rate. This could be completely wrong. I'm just assuming their graphs are the same and they just took the numbers off. And this is the only thing I can do. And then if we take a look at the emergency rooms, they're up 32%. We look up the hospitalization, up 16% because it's didn't have to multiply it because it's just one. And then the COVID deaths, is it a little higher or not? Hard to tell. I thought it was a little higher. And so then I get 19% increase for that. It came back over to this line. And so here is blown up big. The one that they had before, it was the trend in emergency and department visits. And they said it was 16%. And this is what it looked like. And all I did is I took this and reduced it proportionally so that the vertical and horizontal didn't change and made this distance the same as the distance in each of these graphs.
Thank you for doing all this homework.
You're welcome. This is probably the stuff the CDC doesn't want people doing with their slides. But for me, just seeing it come up without a number tells me nothing at all. And so that's why I looked at it and happy to share it with you. Now, you may wonder how the two variants that they're talking about is jumping back to, because I remember I did them out of order, jumping back to the two that are picked for the vaccine. And the two big numbers, they have a lot of data that they collect here, and some of it is kind of irrelevant to us looking at it, like the originating lab is really important to the guys submitting it, and the host is all human, and the clade, well, that's what we're looking at. And the fact it came from Israel and that it's out of Israel is in the Asian region. Okay, the authors, the collection date, that's interesting. But the things that I focused on was the immune escape compared to BA2. How well this can escape from antibodies. And they have a test that they ran. And so this is 1.7 times. And you can sit there and say, well, I wonder if these two that they're allowing the manufacturer to pick between, if they're kind of the same. Well, immune escape 1.7. If you remember, we've seen it go up to 2.5 times as much escape. So this is a sort of middling. It's more escape than BA2, but it's not the highest escape we've ever seen, certainly. And this is 1.7, and this one is 1.37. Okay. Maybe they have 3 significant digits in their test, but it's showing that that's what? 30% less. So these two differ on immune escape by 30%. So which one you get and which one is actually running around that it might protect you from, maybe one to be better than the other. And the other is the ACE2 binding, how well this, the virus variant binds to the ACE2 binding site. And here, this is 31.8% as good as the BA2. And this one is 1.03, so it's roughly 3 times. So it's a third lower on the escape and 3 times as good in binding. What does it mean in terms of infection? I have no idea. But these two variants that they're letting the manufacturers choose between, depending if they're feasible, there might be a real difference in how well they work for a given variant strain grouping that's floating around at the time you might get infected.
A quick question. So Jean says, I understand most hospitals aren't reporting in the US. Is this correct?
It depends what you're asking if they're reporting.
I think COVID starts.
Well, let's take it. Good question. And let's look at my next slide. I think it will help answer this. These are the number of regions that have more than 300 sequences to figure out what variants are floating around. And the ones that aren't there have fewer than 300 reporting. Remember before we had every region all the time? I think the answer is they're reporting a lot less. And we also can note it from the ones that are reporting, look how big the red is here and how little it is there. We're getting the same sort of regional changes of which variants are there. The slides that we're getting from the federal government are calculating the average of all those across all the US, which might be way different from where you are. So even if you could pick which vaccine you wanted and you use the CDC numbers for what's floating around, you still might be aiming at this one and end up with that one. Now, if you went from 9 to 8, I mean, yeah, there's not much difference, is there? Okay. Anyway, we're seeing this. There aren't 300 in Hawaii or Alaska or Puerto Rico or any of the other areas. We just have regions 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, and 9, almost like we've got the coast reporting, and that's it. The other thing is it might be a timing thing, and in a month or two, they might have more reports in, and they might be able to, in hindsight, fill this map up a lot more. I don't know. And the same thing would be true when we get to the wastewater, which is right here. See, they say the wastewater is very high, and very high is the top 2 out of 10, which means it's in the 90th percentile. And I look at that and I say, yeah, that looks like that's like a third, right? So anyway, and we never got, from when they started, we've never been down at 0. And this is talking about wastewater viral activity. And there's a measurement of some sort. I don't know what it is. I'm assuming it's consistent. And so the wastewater average is going up and down, up and down, up and down. And it's here, and they're telling everyone it's very high. We have to be worried about it. When I took the range, high point to low point, and took what percentage of that, it turns out that we are 34%. And a 34% would be reported right here in the low zone. So some people might say the difference between what they're reporting and what their data shows is a political bias, or maybe they're just trying to encourage people that their vaccine stuff is relevant and they should be looking at that. But anyway, that's what I did. I assumed that this was high. I don't know how high it might possibly ever get, but this is how high they reported. That was as low as they reported, and we've been that low 3 times and never lower. So my bet is that's a good number. And here we would be at 34%. Now, someone from the CDC may say, well, this is a really old data point, and why is it that you're doing it? And I'll say, okay, then let's just look at what happened from the last one. And then we're only at 62%, and 62 would put it at the high, and we still can't get to the very high because it's not as high as it was the last peak. And so, yeah, so this is the, and remember the last time that we did this, the first time I did it, they had the designation just completely wrong. It was low, and they were showing it high. And the last time we did it, they were putting at low, and it looked like that was about right. So this was the old slide that looked a lot better. But now, since I've gone and done this and blown it up by chopping off the prior history and just showing the last peak and where it goes, the curve becomes a lot longer. And if we take that longer curve and blow it up, So you still have the two lines. And then put lines for the slope. This is how it was rising before, and then it rose at this level. Then it came. It looks like it's heading down. It's not continuing to increase like there was an ongoing infection that was just infecting more and more people. And let's go back again and take a look. None of these peaks have been long. They always hit the top and come right back down. And so here it sort of went higher and then started down. Here we had a little level and another peak, and that was probably because we had infections in some region and then we went to other regions. And so my view is the data here wouldn't support that we put it in a higher classification because we think that it's getting worse and we're about to have an even more prevalent virus in the wastewater, that this is going to peak high. I think it's going to continue to come around and come back down, and we're about at the peak level of this peak. And again, okay, since I said that, let's go back and look. This is the curve of the data, and I think what will happen is this will come up maybe a little more, peak over, and then come back down. And given that here it didn't go all the way down, and here it didn't go all the way down, but these three places it did, I suspect that it'll either have an intermediate peak similar to these two at this level, or it will come all the way back to this lowest level that we've seen. So that's what I'm seeing, and all that drawn from the history and the fact that it's starting to curve over and we have an inflection point. If you like math, that just means the slope changed and it's starting to come down rather than continuing to increase. You see here we have an inflection point, it's increasing, another inflection point, it starts leveling off, and then we have another one here and one at this point. So I think these two are starting to head down some way.
Understood.
And is this real data or is this just how they collect it? I have no idea. I'm just looking at a line. So this is the best I can get from it, and it might be all wrong, but I certainly wouldn't panic over we're about to have this extremely high level and COVID is about to come back and cause whatever. I wouldn't be excited. I'm not excited about that. So here we have, again, all the different sites that are collected. And for example, if you're in Tennessee, you're not represented very much at all. If you're in Texas and you're not in Houston or Dallas, you're not really represented much at all. You're up here in North Dakota. Anyway, so this is for the wastewater. It is what it is, and they're collecting, and they have 14, excuse me, here they have 1,466 sites. And they had this bizarre data next to it, and they showed the percent change in category. This doesn't make any sense. These are all going negative, and this one is going up, and this is only 5%. So what's going on here? Well, taking it and calculating it backwards, because this is where you ended up, and if you actually reduce 2% from how many sites actually were taken away from the new site, or excuse me, I didn't do the new site, but from the 20 or less, 40 or less, 60, whatever. Turns out you add them all up, it's only, 7 sites, and you add them in. It turns out that with the number of sites they reported and whatever, this number is about a little less than about where they're reporting. So I don't know what it means, but it looks like it's fairly consistent that they really had that number going out. And it may be that we're getting more percentage-wise sites, but we haven't caught up with the number that reported last time. And my bet is if this data is run like a lot of data as I've seen, they keep the prior week open forever. And if someone comes in 4 months later, they add them in, and then the data that they go back and compare to has data that wasn't representative of what they knew when last week was the same as this week. And so you sort of chase your tail around. And my bet is that's what they're doing, because if they did it differently, then they'd have to have different data points for this is the the week of July 7th as measured on this date and measured on that date. And you end up with a lot more data that usually isn't very useful. So my bet is that these number of sites and the fact that the category reporting less, this is probably just a time measurement. And by the end of next week, these numbers will probably all be positive because they had 51 new sites added in. And as you put 51 new sites in, you're going to get more in every in the categories. If the proportion stays the same, you're going to get more in every category. So anyway, this was just a check, and and I think it says this means that they probably are updating their data live. Every week is live, and so if someone says, "Oh, back in October last year, I didn't report. Here's that report," they'll add it in, and someone looking at the data, a year from now won't be able to tell that October report from that one site wasn't there. And so that's the way most data sites are done. But this just shows that whatever they're doing, it looks like it's consistent. I'm not sure I know what they're doing, but this was the only data they had, and I just wanted to check and see if it looked consistent or if it looked like something wasn't being done right. So then overall, it appears that the world is approaching the end of COVID. Again, not the end, but maybe it's the beginning of the end. And this is an active disease, and it oscillates just as we were seeing before. And this is the slide that we had when we had good data from the UK, oscillating up and down and not uniform like a spring, but coming down. And as we made these various predictions as to when it would come down, as you can see, 0 is way, way, way off there. And these are linear, and most biological functions decrease geometrically, which means the curve starts here, comes down, and then it flattens out, and it takes forever to make the last little bit. And I imagine that's what COVID will do, and people may not care very much. But here, people are still getting sick. I believe my wife has it right now. People are still dying. I believe my wife is not dying. We're going to get new variant classes, and that's required to have reinfection occur. If we didn't have new variant classes, once someone was infected, they would not be as severely infected by, we wouldn't continue to have COVID. There'd be a real step down in the discomfort and medical trouble that occurs from it. As far as I know, there's no changes indicated in any of the treatment protocols. And political folks have COVID. They're still reporting that they have COVID. So again, some of the conspiracy theories or whatever, I think it's really a disease out there. Maybe they helped, maybe they didn't, but we're still getting people reported and isolating and things like that. And I think most of the country is treating it like a cold. I will tell you that I wouldn't object if someone said, if my wife took ivermectin, she would feel better. I can't say that wouldn't have happened, but I'm not going to say anything else about that. So long COVID and vaccine injury cases appear to be constant and continuing at whatever rate they are when people take a vaccine and when people take COVID. I mean, let's talk about other vaccines that are largely considered good by almost everyone. The polio vaccine has a certain rate, the live polio vaccine, of people that get horribly ill from it. And we decided that's an acceptable risk. And every medicine you have has a side effect or a downside that occurs, and some people can get horribly ill and die from it, perhaps. And the actual risks that are for these are uncertain. We don't have any good measurement of it, and it's unfortunate. I would have thought that by now we could have had a much better measurement of long COVID and vaccine injury. Part of the problem is you can't really define it very well. It's not like chickenpox where you can look at someone and say, I thought last week you were getting it, and now I've got a visual confirmation. And so this is just difficult. But as far as informing you, I haven't found anything else about it, and I haven't found anything that shows that the treatment is changing or that it's doing anything more than just bouncing along sort of at the up and down rate as the variant classes change. There's the old slide again where we're able to calculate the number of days and whatever. And if you remember, we were looking at the peaks and whatever, and it looks like it's, I didn't think it was mathematically accurate, but there's no reason to believe that it wasn't generally about correct going forward. And now for something completely different. We took a look excess deaths. And I looked at it from the OECD, and we did whatever. And I looked at it when there was a certain Dr. John Campbell that was reporting stuff with England. And I went back and looked at the numbers, and I could not find excess deaths. I could find some months that had excess deaths and some months that had less deaths, taking COVID out, of course. COVID deaths were excess. But in trying to take them out, whatever. About a month ago, he had another video where he has this 500-page report looking at starting off with like 130 countries and 50 plus had valid data or whatever. He found a 0.5% excess death. I'm not saying that's irrelevant, but that's certainly less than what I would have detected with the techniques I was using. So again, if we were worried about excess deaths, it may well be that there are excess deaths. It may well be associated with the lockdown or whatever else. There might be something else infecting people now. It might be anything, but at a 0.5% rate, my bet is we have a lot of things come in that are excess deaths at that rate, and we don't even notice them. And now we're at least looking, and so maybe something good will do. But this is certainly within, I didn't do an official thing with error bars, but it was certainly within, I wouldn't have expected to have found something this small with the gross studies I was doing and looking at. So hopefully that can help people feel a little better on the excess deaths that were going around. And so the conclusion, COVID isn't over, still dangerous for some, and it's a little inconvenient for all the people that get it. And if it's completely irrelevant for you, you won't even know that you had it. So that's why I can say it's a little inconvenient for all, because again, if it doesn't affect you at all, you won't even know that you're sick. And it's continuing to change so that the effect is slowly decreasing, but slowly. It's appearing about the same from what I can see. And as the disease gets more finely tuned to people, and some people get more finely tuned to it, I imagine it will become less and less of a inconvenience for some, for all, a danger for some. And that's what I've got. Any other questions or concerns?
Excellent. Thank you so much. A lot of good homework. Some rhetorical questions, but generally all good. So thank you very much for your time, Paul.
You're welcome.
And Cool Beans, thank you very much. And tomorrow we'll do a chit chat and we'll go from there. I was thinking of having chit chat with the channel members. However, tell me if that is a good idea, or should we just have an open chit chat? With this, thank you very much, and I'll see you tomorrow. And Paul, once again, thank you.
You're quite welcome.